All right. Welcome, everyone, to our live broadcast of the Home Services Summit webinar series. I'm Scott Abbott, one of the founders of 5-Star Painting, CEO of 5-Star Franchising, and as part of that, ProNexis. I look forward to interviewing David Nilssen today and talking about how to make your franchise system more efficient and effective by leveraging outside talent from your organization. Before we get into that, just a real quick intro to ProNexis and what ProNexis does. Our mission at ProNexis is to transform the customer experience in the home services industry through voice, chat, text, and instant booking. Our format is really straightforward and simple. I'll be interviewing David for the next 45 minutes. Along the way, feel free to, in the comments section, any point in time, to ask questions, and I'll make sure that I answer those with David for you. It's always great to get your feedback and thoughts on things that we can help you build your home service franchise better with. Some fun facts and some announcements and housekeeping items before we get into the content today. We just completed our Home Service Summit. It was a few weeks ago. It was great to see many of you attend. We had about 200 people attending from various home service companies, leaders, and many participants were involved in different panels and conversations, as well as some of our thought leaders presenting ideas for us. It was a phenomenal 2-day event. Thank you for participating, for those that were attending. And I look forward to seeing you in person next year when we take Home Service Summit to an in-person venue. I'm looking forward to announce that venue here pretty soon. As well, we've got some fun things happening. I got a little limited edition unconference, which has been done by Lane Fisher and Brad Fishman over the years. This year, they've asked us to step up and do this limited edition version. It's going to be a very throwback to the roots of unconference. It's about 60 people in Park City, March 15th through 17th. It'll be some skiing, snowboarding, snowmobiling, some fun in the snow, as well as some suites at a Jazz game versus the Bulls, and some great networking with people in the industry. I think we've got about 25 or 30 home service brands attending already. We'd love to have you guys attend and be involved, and also just have some fun in person together. So with that, let me introduce David Nilssen, who's the CEO of Doxa Talent. Very impressive individual. Before I read his bio, I want to just give a quick shout out to our relationship, which started probably about 12 years ago. Actually, at Unconference, we connected, among other IFA events in Park City. And at that event, we were watching these Olympians doing flips and tricks on trampolines in a small, very quiet venue, and we were talking business. And David was he was just fantastic. He was one of the few people I'd met in my life that was willing to talk about the real things going on in companies. And if you're starting a home service brand, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are times in your business where you're gonna have some very hard things occur. It could be losing some of your top people, trying to find some top people, trying to find money for payroll. It could be, how do I sell franchises? How do I keep franchises? It could be, how do I find leads? I mean, it's almost anything. And David had this authenticity around being willing to share what's really going on in his mind around his company. And actually, from that conversation, I learned about an organization called Entrepreneur Organization, or short for EO for short. And I literally went home, went on to eonetwork.org, applied to join the organization. It transformed my life. I've been a member now since then. It's been over 12 or 13 years. And it's been a big part of how I've built my business. Not just that, but approach relationships with people with authenticity and being willing. It's one of the reasons I do the series, is because I want to make sure that I'm bringing the real deal to as many people as possible about business and running companies. And if I can help someone, I get great joy in doing that, just like David helped me in the early days of our company. So let me go ahead and just read his bio, because what I said is cool, but what he's done is even more impressive. He has helped nearly 25,000 entrepreneur-minded individuals access $5 billion to start or acquire small businesses or franchises. So if you're in franchising and you are trying to help franchisees get funding, Guidant Financial, which he's the founder of, helps those people get the funds they need through using their 401k or other means to finance the purchase of their business and buy into the American dream. He also volunteers his time with the Entrepreneur Organization to provide growth and development opportunities for business owners all over the world. In 2011, Making the Jump into Small Business Ownership was published and is now available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble as one of his books he's authored, which I'm sure would be an amazing read. So, David, welcome to our Home Service Summit webinar series. Thank you for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. I was funny. I was thinking back at that unconference. I think I don't know what the timeline was. I just know that when we did it, neither one of us had the salt in the beard that we both currently have. So it's been a while.
Every one of these gray hairs represents a franchisee that gave me some kind of grief at some point in their career.
I don't have that same excuse, but that's all right.
But I think what's important to note here is over time, we've had various people on our show, founders, CEOs of various franchise brands. I think this is long overdue, this interview, David, because it's one of the secrets to our success in our business. And I want to jump right into the story as to why, you created Doxa 7 or Doxa
Talent.
Go ahead. Talent. Thank you. What's the backstory? Tell me your story. What got you into that business, and how did that then change into Doxa Talent?
Yeah. Well, so you did a good job of setting up what Guidant does, right? We help new franchisees or entrepreneurs to either start or buy a business by providing them capital. We do it through SBA loans and unsecured credit, rollovers for business startups, things like that. Well, what a lot of people don't know about our business, though, is that while we help them, these entrepreneurs, find financing, we also provide them services once they launch their business, like tax and accounting, payroll, even 401k administration. So we're a service-based organization. And in order to provide those types of services, yes, there's lots of technology involved, but there's lots of people too. So in growing the business, we continue to scale up the number of people that were supporting our customers. And in 2015, 16, we started to notice that the growth strategy that we had in place was going to be outdated relatively soon. So the war on talent, as I always call it, or the scarcity of talent, the cost of labor, the issues that we're talking about every single day, were in Seattle back then. So, Seattle's a pretty small labor pool, got about 800,000 people in the city proper. And there's, Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Facebook and Boeing and Costco and all sorts of businesses vying for that talent. And so we were starting to notice our people were moving further and further away from the city, and the cost of labor was just going higher. So we thought, we got to start looking at ways to attack this long-term to make sure that we can continue to provide a good life for our people, but also continue to grow the business in a responsible way. So we looked at all sorts of options. We looked at, moving to different geographies, to using more vendors and or outsourced experts. And then we looked at offshoring and outsourcing. And eventually we decided that offshoring was going to be a strategy that we wanted to hitch our wagon to, because we believed it was a capability that businesses were going to need to use to be competitive. And so, we spent the last 6 years really sort of figuring out how to do that in a way that was strategic and meaningful for our business. And as the pandemic started to realize that this is a core capability that we think every company needs, and it's so aligned with a lot of these trends that we're starting to see as a result of it. And so we launched Doxa Talent to help small and medium-sized businesses leverage global talent in a conscious way to help them grow in the future.
So what I love about what you're talking about there is, and I've shared this story with a few people over time, when we started 5-Star Painting in 2004, it's been, almost 18 years now. One of the things we really was as part of our DNA as an organization is this, and it's actually one of our values today. We call it loyal to the royal, which is we treat the royalties we receive from franchisees with care and frugality. And it's just part of this scrappiness that we have as an organization. And so I realized that the amount of royalties I received in my business had nothing to do where I was headquartered, what kind of offices I kept, or where I was located. And so we actually chose just south of Salt Lake City, Utah, as our headquarters in 2005, 2006, because we realized that we needed to drive as much value back to the franchisees for the royalties they were paying back to us, right? This is part of kind of how we approach things. And so what you're talking about falls right in line with that. And it's this idea that if you aren't currently outsourcing some resources overseas and leveraging talent overseas, you can't get as much done for the revenue you're bringing in. And so it fits so well into what Doxa does. And so let's spend some more time on, as a franchisor thinking about where they should be finding talent, like what countries should they be looking at to find that talent? Where do you find talent at Doxa? Is there a certain fit with certain skill sets and those countries, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there's lots of great opportunities out there, regardless of the type of business this a franchisor may be. When we first started looking at this opportunity, I went to China and Kazakhstan, India, Vietnam, the Philippines, and even Mexico, looking at the different capabilities that exist in those areas and trying to think about like, what time zone do I need them to work? Is an accent something that we need to be considering? Are there government investments, and is there the right infrastructure? And what does the relationship between countries look like? Doxa Talent, we decided to establish our first presence in the Philippines, and we've got workers in the Philippines and Vietnam. But there's great areas all over the world that people consider. I know that if you're looking for customer service type professionals, Mexico is known as a great place for people to do that. There are, India, Ukraine, Uruguay are places that are known for having great engineering talent. We were talking about this earlier, but the Eastern Bloc is great for like finance and engineering. And then we personally were drawn to Philippines first, because the Philippines is a service-based culture. They have this word that they use to describe their culture, bayanihan, which just means we take care of our community to achieve a common goal. So it's kind of threaded in their DNA, and it has one of the softest accents of the foreign countries that we've been to, plus it's English speaking. So there's a reasons we went there, but I think depending on whether you're looking for finance, engineering, technology, marketing, customer service, sales, all of those roles can be put to work in other areas. But the geographies vary.
It'd be worth also maybe talking about economics, David, right? Because really one of the reasons why we'd be entertaining outsourcing is there's clearly a cost of living differential between us and the Philippines, right? As beautiful as the Philippines is, it does not cost nearly as much as it does a cost to live in Utah, or in your case, Idaho. What would someone expect to pay for a full-time resource in different categories if they were hiring those people in the Philippines?
Yeah, the numbers are all relative, right? So I live in Boise, Idaho. Most of my team is in Idaho and Seattle, at least in the U.S. We're technically in 16 states, but here, what I've always told people is you can expect to save about 60 to 70% in terms of going offshore. Now, that is related to the markets that I spend my time in, which is the Philippines and Vietnam, and a little bit in Kazakhstan. But I think that's relatively true as you sort of venture out into these other geographies. You can expect 60 to 70% is the potential to save. But I do want to just say one thing, because we've sort of floated on the types of roles. I think a lot of people tend to think of offshoring or outsourcing as, I'm going to take the work that I don't want to do, and I'm just going to give it to this lower cost geography. That is a model that people have been using forever, and I think it's something that can add value. But the way that we think about it is anything that is business as usual for you you can leverage outsourced talent to actually conduct that. So, we've hired everything from software engineers to virtual assistants to CPAs, attorneys, sales development reps, customer service. So I just want to underscore that it's not just administrative professionals, but it's really any sort of skilled labor that you would potentially hire domestically. And
when you think about, maybe one of the concerns, obviously there's a cost savings, right? That's clear. We can save 50 to 60% on hiring overseas. I completely understand that. But is there going to be, do you think the people effectively are efficient or capable at the same job that we're trying to do here? Like, should I be planning for every one person I have working here in the United States, should I be applying for, planning on 1.5 to do the same quality or quantity of work? Or, how should we be thinking about that?
Well, it's funny. There's a couple different ways to think about it. So first I would say is, no, I think of it as, hey, if you're going to hire someone anywhere, they should be able to fulfill a full role. So we don't think about it in terms of any other ratio than 1-to-1. I do think how the company, how proficient the company is in managing talent outside of a centralized operation actually is the bigger contributor to whether or not they get the full value. So, for example, when we first started Guidant, we were a fully centralized operation. And until the pandemic, we had 100 plus people in one location. Now, since then, we've gone fully remote. There is no office whatsoever. And we've gotten really good at sort of management by objective or management, rather than management by site, I should say. And so I do think that is a huge contributing factor. The other issue is, whether somebody decides to work with global talent directly or they leverage a firm like Doxa Talent or, the others that exist, will also determine the value there, because how good you are at hiring global talent and finding the right talent also is a contributor. But to go back to your original question, if you are hiring a CPA in the US or an accountant in the US and you decide to take that and hire another or replace one with an offshore resource, you should expect the same sort of productivity.
I think we got to go back just for a second and hit on a couple of things that you mentioned that are really important. You just said that you need the shift to manage people overseas is a shift from management by site, which we are all have been comfortable with for probably the last 20 or 30 years of running companies, to management by objectives, which it sounds way better, frankly. That means we're really looking at results-based activities. Yeah. And you also mentioned something I want to touch on, that Guidant has gone to distributed workforce. Can you spend some time talking to us about why, if there ever was a time to be thinking about outsourcing talent, right? If there ever was a time, it feels like now's the time, because all of us have gone through shifting. If we were managing by site before, we were forced to go to management by objectives recently in the last 2 years. I'm having more and more conversations with brands that are completely distributed, completely remote. They've changed their entire work environment. I know for us, during COVID moved. We actually changed up our work environment. And so maybe just talk to us about, why this is a good time, maybe how people are now shifting towards being more open to using nearshore or overseas talent. And I'd like to hear also your story about what happened when Guidant went from being, all in one office to now distributed.
Yeah,
there's lots there to unpack.
Let me actually start there, because I think when we first started looking at the idea of leveraging global talent in our workforce, it was sort of a sensitive announcement, right? I've heard you talking about values and your vision already in this call, and that's how we were. We were, I would say, a very purpose-oriented, vision and values aware organization and a celebrated culture. But we were a fully centralized operation at the time. And so I was a little bit anxious going to my team and saying, hey, we're about to add some global talent, because I knew that the first reaction would be, well, what does this mean for me? So when we went forward and told the team that we were going to be expanding outside the US, we just sort of put a line in the sand and said, but we want to be really clear, no one is going to lose their job as a result of going down this path. Our decision to go this strategy was not to cut costs. It was to allow us to grow more efficiently. So we weren't going to be reducing any roles whatsoever. But as we were continuing to grow, we were going to leverage global talent to help us do that. Why I think that's important today, though, to go back to your question, is I think the future is borderless. I think, you're seeing a trend towards decentralization. 10 years ago, I was the guy that was still asking people to put on a tie and slacks to come to work. And now we're a fully remote operation. I think there's a flex expectation in, with employees today. They don't want to be stuck 9 to 5 sitting at a desk. They want a little bit more flexibility in their workforce, and they want no micromanagement. It's like we talked about. It's management by objective versus management by site. All these things are happening simultaneously, and at the same time, the world is just completely distributed because of COVID. So I have this really strong belief this is a core capability that just about every business is going to have to develop, because if you deprive yourself of offshoring talent and your competitors don't, you're putting yourself in a challenging position.
Well, that's so important, David. That what you just said there is and you never want to manage a company watching your competitors, right? Like, you don't do things because your competitors are doing them,
right?
But you hit on something really important. And I come back to, once again, one of our values. I feel like it's my duty as a CEO and as a manager of a good company to grow efficiently, right? And what you said around making sure you're not telling when you're letting your team know you're using outsourced talent, that does not put their job in jeopardy. If anything, I'd say it actually secures their future, because you're signaling that you can get more done more efficiently, you're delivering more value, and I'll disclose, we've had about 45 employees or so that work overseas currently.
Yeah.
And so I think that, we believe in this. Obviously, it's a really big part of how we've been able to grow our company.
Yeah.
I think it's worth noting then, if people haven't been sold on the idea that they need to be using outsourced talent or overseas talent or nearshore talent, hopefully they are at least coming around to the idea. I think you can do this wrong though. And so I think we need to spend some time on, like, what are the pitfalls to, you can go on Indeed or some other resource right now and just do a search for talent in the Philippines and hire somebody. And I'm sure many people who are watching or listening today have done something like that on some project. I'd love to get, your help here a little bit in terms of, like, what are the pitfalls to doing it wrong? To just doing that. Like, what if to scale up and add 10 people in the Philippines? I mean, there are regulations. We're not from the Philippines, in India as well, and other countries. What kind of things do we have to worry about legally in doing that?
Yeah. So, that's a big question. So let me just kind of zoom out for 10 seconds though, and talk about sort of the use cases, right? Where are people using it? And then, as it comes down to where the rubber meets the road, where can they sort of trip? So first thing that comes to mind is there's really what I call 3 use cases for global talent. The first would be a project, right? I don't actually support project-based work. We work with people who want to hire people that will be a perpetual contributor in their organization. But if you just have a project, there are hundreds of websites, including Fiverr and Upwork, TopTal, where you can find global talent to work on a specific project for a shorter period of time. Then there is their personal efficiencies. Like I think one of the greatest benefits you can give leadership and certain types of professionals is a virtual assistant that gives them, it's a very cost-effective way to give people more leverage and allow them to focus their time on more specific tasks. And then there's the skilled labor, which we talked about earlier, that if you've got these ongoing business as usual operations, there's a way to leverage global talent really effectively and cost efficiently that way. And then the question is, how do you structure it? Because there are people like me that have an entity in the Philippines and an entity in Vietnam. To put that infrastructure in place is not a small task, and it is not inexpensive. So, it makes sense to go down that path if someone's looking to establish a very large team. If not, then they have the choice of going direct to an individual and contracting them independently, or working with an employer of record, per se, a business process outsourcing group, like what we're doing. So there's lots of options in how, what you would use them for, how you would structure it. And then the question is, where do people fall down? And the big ones that come to mind for me, the first is integrating them as part of the team. So in most cases, these people are not employees of your operation. They're either contracted or there's another employer of record. And so it's really easy for people to think of them as sort of like this outside entity, not really involve them in team meetings, don't communicate with them the same way. You're not providing them swag. They don't feel part of your operation. As a result of that, you'll see that the industry standard is 40% annual turnover. So a lot of people tell me that they tried offshoring or outsourcing and it doesn't work. And many of them worked with these, what I would call volume hiring firms that are just trying to hire lots of people, hoping they're going to work for you. And if not, then they'll just continually replace them. And that's the wheel that we wanted to move away from, so that they felt like they were a valuable part of our organization and a valuable part of the organizations they're supporting. The other is, with the way that they price. So, I've seen a lot of people lose great talent because they underpaid. I've also seen them retain talent that effectively quit and stayed because they're getting overpaid. And so I think making sure that whether you go directly or work with an employer of record, that you are intelligent about the way that you're crafting those offers. And I think those are two of the kind of the bigger ones that I see. And the last one I'll just say, which I think is really important, is no matter where we are in the world, people want to continue to learn and grow and develop as professionals. And so again, another mistake that I see with offshoring is that we hire a virtual assistant, we hire a programmer, and we just continue to just send them work, and it's a real transactional relationship. But with the employers that are willing to invest, they have They meet on a regular cadence. They're helping to develop their skills and try and up-level them as professionals so that they can contribute more and even earn more over time. Those are the people that get the best out of the talent.
So I think I'm going to keep bouncing between like tactical and strategic, because I feel like I hope these become, very informative. Like you mentioned a few tools that I think are valuable for our listeners, right? Like using TopTow. I had never heard of them before. Thank you for mentioning them. Upwork, Fiverr for project-based stuff. You mentioned BPOs or business processing organizations. Is that what it is?
Process outsourcing.
Business process outsourcing. Thank you. These are kind of terms that are in the industry that you can use and leverage. I think it's on that note, I wanted to zero in on probably something more strategic. You said that often people will use their outsourced talent and treat them as outsourced talent, so they're always on the outside. Like you don't share swag with them. There's probably some lessons here around, even for those listeners who just have a distributed workforce here. How do you create culture and keep culture with people in the Philippines? Like, do I just gonna send them a hat with a logo on it? Like, what do you think we should be doing or thinking about when we start off using talent overseas?
Well, I think what you just said is super important, because I always tell people, like, if I live in Seattle or Boise and I'm going to hire someone in Florida, it's no different than managing somebody in the Philippines or India or Kenya or Kazakhstan. I mean, it's a remote management capability that's really important. And I would think about it the same way. Are they involved in the team meetings? Are they getting the ongoing communication that's important for them to be able to deliver on their role? Are we investing in their training and development? Do they feel connected to the people? Because we know people leave companies because of the managers. Would they stay because they feel like they have a best friend? Mm-hmm. And so these are the things like we have to continually not only work hard at as our organization, but also train our clients on to make sure that they're getting the best out of their talent by creating an environment that contributes to retention.
The word, if you didn't hear it before, I'll say it again: remote management capabilities. I like that you got the buzzwords, David. You got them down. And I think that's like, we all have to be thinking that way. How do I manage my company and maintain culture, integrate those people that are in my organization so that, as you mentioned, David, like it's hard to have a friend if you're not making and treating them like an equal or a peer in some way. That's one of the secrets to any relationship, is this peerness that needs to be a part of our relationships. And so if you're treating them as someone that's lesser than, they're going to feel that. And the reality is, these are people. They are very talented. I'm going to pick on something, though, that I'm sure some people are thinking, like, should I really be investing in my outsourced talent? And when you said that, I thought, like, I almost asked myself the question, I don't know if I am doing enough in terms of investing. In the same way I have people who work in my organization, I send them to conferences, I send them to training, I buy them books. I do those kinds of things because they're very near me, and I want them to all become better professionals. Not just because it helps my company, because I care about them. I actually want them to be successful, right? Mm-hmm. And I haven't thought that same way about those people that I've outsourced my work to overseas. And so how do I invest in outsourced talent?
Well, there's two ways that I invest. So I'll speak from my own perspective. So when we opened up our first office in the Philippines, and this is prior to Doxa Talent, and this is when I was leading Guidant Financial, I would fly out to the Philippines twice a year. And that was to make sure that I was building a relationship with the people that were working with our organization and actually interacting with our customers. I wanted to develop a relationship there. The second was making sure that every single person was on a development plan. Now, that doesn't mean we're managing them. That's the job of whoever's the employer of record, but it means that we were taking interest in what are their hopes and their dreams and what do they want to learn from a career standpoint. One of the best books I've read in a long time, and it was probably 3 or 4 years ago I read it. It was called The Alliance. And it sort of changed the way that I think about developing people, because they talk about our job as CEOs, as business leaders, as managers, is to develop our people and prepare them for the next role, whether it's with us or not. So they think about it in terms of, they use the term tour of duty. We ask people to sign on for 2 years and do a tour of duty. And after 2 years, we're either going to help them move on or move up. And either way, it's a success if we've done our job the right way. And so that's the way I try to think about it, is what do I want to, what relationship do I want to have with them? And then what are the skills and capabilities that they need to develop to prepare them for the next role, which I hope is within our organization.
once again, you got these one-liners are awesome. Help them move on or move up. Write that on your whiteboard right now. Remember, that's how you need to be thinking about your talent. You want to be in a position where, and this actually was mentioned at the, I don't know if you went to if you attended the IFA, maybe you heard it. Charlie Chase, the new chairman of the IFA, was speaking. He actually talked about this specifically, about this idea of this tour of duty, right? People who come to your organization will leave your organization at some point, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Do you want them to be out there being a cheerleader of the organization they're a part of? Do you want them telling everyone how amazing it was working at your company because they learned and they grew with you? And when they were with you, they gave you their best talent they could. And so, thinking about that way, I know an earlier version of myself, if I go back to 16 years ago, 17 years ago, and some of the feelings or emotions I may have felt around someone leaving my company, feelings of betrayal or, some very difficult emotions because it was very personal for me, right? But my views on that have changed so much around people and in organizations that now I look very much around. I'm looking for the best interests of the individual while they're here with me, and in some cases, that's meant letting them go. Like, you don't belong here. You could do better someplace else, and help you transition to that someplace else. I have fired people, and then I've spent hours afterwards helping them find the next job at a company where I knew their talents were a better fit than mine, and sending that message, I care about them. So I love that you shared that, because I think this is some great, once again, gold nugget. David always has them. It's why we're such good friends. It's why I want him on this show. Outsourcing is fantastic, but these are like life lessons of how to run companies. So I really appreciate that, David. Thank you.
Hey, Scott, can I add something? Because by the way, I appreciate your share on that, because I think everybody's felt that way, right? When someone leaves their organization, especially when you're a little bit younger in your career, I used to have the same emotions, taking it personal for some reason. And now I actually had a conversation the other day. We had somebody that had given notice, and it's a really high potential individual, but the reality is we don't have the opening for the next step that they need to take in their life and in their career, right? And so I think you're right. You'd rather sort of help them make that transition, knowing that you're gonna find somebody that's gonna fill that role, and things will be okay. And that person's gonna have a great experience, and they'll still be a raving fan of your operation. So I think that's really, I'm glad you said that. But I want to share one thing, because we were talking a lot about offshore talent, but there's another sort of stakeholder in this whole relationship that often doesn't get talked about, and that's the domestic talent. And so I wanted to share a use case that recently came up within our operation that I think it kind of helps people think about, why is using global talent not only a benefit to the business or even the customers, but can actually be a real benefit to the workers that exist within the operation. And so we have a client who had 2 AR specialists, so accounts receivables. One of them gave notice, and the client came to us and said, hey, is it possible to hire AR, accounts receivable specialists in the Philippines? And I said, absolutely. We've done it many times. And so they ended up hiring 2 people in the Philippines. They were able to move the domestic worker into a supervisor position. So that person is making more money, now been given a broader role and a chance to develop a new skill set, while 2 people were given great work at a fair wage and meaningful work within in that area. And as a result, the company saved money.
Win, win, win. I like it. I love it. So I want to come back to the question I brought up earlier, because I want to hopefully help people avoid some costly errors, right? We talked about, there are right ways of doing things. You mentioned, on a big scale, you could go ahead and fly to the Philippines, which, by the way, if you're planning on outsourcing, there is a free trip and vacation on the company's dime, and it's tax-free, and the Philippines is a great place to visit, or to Vietnam, or wherever else. You can do all that. You can set up your own organization, your own company, abiding by those laws locally. I know there are some, in the Philippines, restrictions around foreign entity ownership. You've got to find ways to work within those laws locally. I don't think we have to get into that in a lot of detail, but there's also ways of doing it wrong, right? Like of approaching this incorrectly. And there are some tax implications to the organization that can be significant. Anything worth sharing here, David, around how can someone do it wrong, and what that could mean to the organization if they did do it wrong?
Yeah, I think it's sort of similar to if you hire somebody in a different state. States have different HR laws, different legal laws, different tax ramifications. And so the same things exist no matter what geography you look at. I can only speak from my own experience, right? So being in the Philippines and Vietnam, I can tell you that some of the more costly mistakes is hiring the wrong person. So we have a process that we go through to try and find the right people the first time, so we don't deal with that 40% turnover issue, because that to me is the most costly. The second is not understanding the culture enough to manage it well, right? And that just leads to additional turnover. Again, a people-oriented issue. But then there are like the laws, the employment laws, I should say, how you deal with payroll, because how people accrue for PTO, bonuses, even the taxes themselves are different from every single jurisdiction or geography. And so, I'll give one example. In the Philippines, you pay PTO out at the end of the year. Some employers in the US say it's a use or lose policy. You don't have that option. And so you have to accrue for that, and you have to be able to pay that out at the end of the year if, in fact, they don't use it. The second is they're in most of Asia, and this is all Asia, not just the Philippines and Vietnam. There's this thing known as the 13th paycheck, which is a double paycheck in December. And most people don't know that, and they get surprised by it at the very end of the year. Whereas if you work with somebody who really understands that, they'll tell you to accrue it on a monthly basis and then just pay it out at the end of the year. And so there's some like simple ways for cash purposes that, working with somebody who really understands the culture, the geography, the laws, so on, makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I'll just say, a lot of entrepreneurs or business owners, business leaders choose to use independent contracting relationships directly with individuals in order to save a little bit of money. And it's something can be done effectively, but there is a risk in that technically as an independent contractor, they should be able to work the hours that they want to work. It should be a very flexible relationship. But what ends up happening is these entrepreneurs and business leaders dictate the hours. They dictate sort of the work that they're taking on. They try to prevent them from taking on other roles or other contracts. And that starts to bleed into an employer relationship, which does have a potential tax ramification for companies in the U.S. So you got to be really careful of that if you go direct.
Yeah, some great information there. I want to just kind of reiterate that, because we experienced that, right, where when we first started outsourcing to the Philippines, didn't know what the 13th paycheck. It was a surprise. For them it's a standard. Like that's just the way it's done. And so if you don't do that, you're really not treating your people right, and they're not going to view you very well. So remembering that's really important. So let's say I'm a small franchisor or a medium-sized franchisor. I'm getting going, and I'm thinking about this idea of beginning to use overseas talent to grow my business. What would you say, or where people should start first? Like, what are the things you see with Doxa talent? Where do people come to you the most for? Like, what kind of things are they looking for to get done the most?
You mean the specific roles?
Yeah, like is it usually process driven? Is it customer service facing? Is it coding? Like what does that look like normally?
Yeah, so there are BPOs or business process outsourcing groups that specialize in just technology and just marketing and just call centers. We are more of a generalist in that standpoint. We put our customer at the center versus a particular type of discipline. So, probably a third of our roles are either finance or administrative. So accountants, bookkeepers, payroll specialists, and then, executive assistants, administrative assistants. Then we've got another third that are what I would call more revenue generating roles, like sales development reps, customer service agents, fulfillment, and then customer service. I think I said that though. And then the final one is technology. So software engineers, program managers, project managers, web devs, so on and so forth. But one thing I will say is I think one of the big mistakes people make when they first think about offshoring is they try to take all the random things that they want done and just put it into one individual. So they come to us with a job description for a Swiss Army knife versus a customer service agent. And so I think it's really important that if somebody's going to go down this path, that they be really clear on the use case and the skill set that they're looking for. Otherwise, they'll find themselves just chasing generalists. And I don't think that's the best place to get the fastest leverage.
I think as you were speaking through those three different categories, I expect most of our listeners to be nodding their heads and going, "Yeah, I can see myself outsourcing my bookkeeping or a customer service rep or my, IT. Those are all functions that we rarely see them anyway. They sit in their office and they sit there just clicking on the keyboard, getting stuff done, right? And so these are things that should be considered and can be considered to do those responsibilities. So I'm glad you brought those up as examples. Let's talk about, we keep saying the Philippines. Obviously, you can outsource near shore to the same time zone. You could outsource to some other time zone that's, almost the flip side of us in Asia, for example. Do you find that your talent, like, do they stay up at night? They start work at 11 o'clock and they work till 7 o'clock to match our hours? Mm-hmm. Or do you see them looking to try and work off hours, like their regular work hours, and then you just tee them up with all the work you want them to do at the end of your day? They do that work, and like in the morning, like Santa Claus, he delivers presents and all the stuff's done. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So, one, I'll just reiterate, there are, I think, really great offshoring opportunities in Mexico and South in Latin America. And then Canada even presents some opportunities for people too. So you're right. It's just about everywhere. Most of the BPO world runs 24/7, particularly in Asia, because again, they're serving, UK and US are kind of the big consumers of those services. And so it does run on a 24/7 cycle. In the Philippines, 20% of their GDP is related to this industry. So it's really important. And what you'll find is if somebody does work overnight, a lot of times their spouse works overnight too. And so they actually prefer to be on synchronized schedules so they can enjoy their life together that way. I would say probably half of our workers do work overnight so that they're working our US time zone. But where it's appropriate, and I would say accounting roles, this is a great example, engineers, a great example, roles where they're not really interfacing with customers or where the collaboration they need to have with the team is less than a couple, 2 or 3 hours a day, then split shifts work really, really well. So for example, in the Philippines, somebody could work 6 a.m. To 3 p.m. And that would end up being that they start at like 2 in the afternoon in the Pacific Standard Time and go until, into the night. And so for me, I could get in at, work my day, and at 2 or 3 or 4, I'm having meetings with these people. We're having our team meetings, the collaboration that we need. And then I go home and they continue to work. And then when I get back in the office, it's in my inbox and the cycle repeats itself. And so that can be a really efficient way to keep work moving on a larger sort of time continuum. But I would say it's about 50% that work overnight and about 50% that are on a split shift.
That's great that you bring that up, because I think for a lot of people, they probably envision not being able to have people work their same time zone, but there are many roles that do actually, that they're willing to work your time zone, even though it means working over the evening or in the early morning. And I can say that from personal experience, there's some roles that fit really, really well. So think about, like at ProNexis, we handle chat for hundreds of companies, and that chat is all accent neutral, right? You just see text, and the Philippines speak English very, very well. Just have a slight accent. So while our phones aren't answered by someone in the Philippines, our texts often are, email often is. So those are things you can have done at a fraction of the cost and still meet, and provide a superior customer experience for your franchisees. Let's talk about coming back to the quality of work. You mentioned management by objectives. How does Doxa organize its management? Like if I'm hiring Doxa and I'm asking for, let's say, a couple of programmers, does that mean that you have a person that's managing those people for me? Am I managing them directly? How does Doxa fit into that? And how would you just recommend that look in terms of how does one manage outsourced talent like that?
Yeah, so there's 2 ways that the offshoring industry really structures related to how they work. So one is you can hire an outsourcing company, right? And they're gonna use their tools, their systems, their processes. They're gonna make the hiring decisions, and they're gonna interface with the workers. And you'll just have someone there that works with you. They'll deliver the outcome that you want, but you're not really involved in how that all works. That didn't work for us because we were a service-based company. I wanted to have a direct relationship with the people who were interacting with our customers and our team. We wanted to be involved in the hiring decisions and the training. There was a lot of things that we wanted to have a little bit more involvement in. And so we went with offshoring, which is more akin to like a PEO, right? So they're going to help us identify candidates, and we are together going to make that decision. So I'll use you as an example, Scott. If you hired us to help you build out a team, and you said, hey, I need a customer service agent, and you give us the job description, we'd go out and find the person that we think is best suited for that. We'd probably serve you up with 3 to 5 candidates. You do some interviews and then decide, hey, we think this one is the best aligned with where we want to go in the skill set we're looking for. We'll hire them on your behalf. We're providing them with benefits and technology, meaning the hardware, 24/7 help desk, any benefits and payroll questions. All of that stuff is administered by us, where we also assign them a team leader, so they have that sort of one point of contact that they're working with on a regular basis for all the questions related to the things I just talked about. But we're not training them to be experts in your business. So your hiring manager is still going to be responsible for training them for whatever is necessary for them to perform their job function. So you have that ongoing relationship, that active dialogue. Now, on a monthly basis, we would meet with your team to decide, like, how can we continue to help augment developing this individual, gather feedback on performance, and make sure that we, as the employer of record, are still having ongoing performance conversations with them. So think about us as the back office administration and bad cop in that relationship.
Got it. Yeah. Shane, good to see you. You got back in. Looks like we had a bit of a technology blip, but I'm glad we're live again. For those of you that have any questions, feel free to fire those into the comments at this point. I've got a few more that I'll lead off with David here as those come in, and look forward to getting some answers back to you all. You mentioned that you go through the process of finding 3 to 4 or 5 candidates for any position we're looking to fill. If you would mind, maybe just share with us, how does Doxa go about finding talent? And if let's say someone's small, looking for just one person, and maybe it isn't a good fit for Doxa, what kind of tools should they be using to try and find talent themselves?
Yeah, I think the question is whether they want to be in the business of hiring and managing offshore talent or not. You can find companies, including Docs, that would help with one resource or not. But the way that we find them is employee referrals, job boards. We do through Indeed and even LinkedIn. We do specific targeted recruiting, and then we do some. We've got our own database, right? We've been doing this long enough, and we're accumulating thousands of resumes on a monthly basis. And so sometimes someone will apply for the job and they're not right for that one, but they're still a great candidate. We'll actually put them in our database to make sure that we can query against that in the future. So there's lots of different ways that we'll find them. I've seen people be successful going on to Fiverr and Upwork and actually just posting for a specific job and then trying to hire them directly or contract them directly. So we go through all of that work to just try and find basically resumes that align with the jobs that we're searching for. But then we do a phone screen, make sure that our HR team feels like they have the basic qualifications that were outlined in the job description. And then we have them take a behavioral assessment because that helps us just understand a little bit more about their wiring. It helps us understand how they'll interact with the sort of requirements of the job itself, but also how they pair with their hiring manager, because we assess the hiring manager as well. And then we do a panel interview. And assuming that goes well, then we send them on to the client to do a couple of interviews. And then, like I said, collectively they'll decide who to actually extend the offer to. But people can certainly do it on their own. There's lots of job boards depending on the country that you want to go into, the job boards are different.
Sure, yeah.
It's kind of like Career Builder, Indeed, and Monster here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make, is that I know, for example, in the Philippines, I can't remember the name of the website, but we've used it a lot to recruit, specifically in Cebu or other parts of the country. You're looking for a certain kind of employee. Yep. And that those have been very effective. I'm assuming there's something for Kazakhstan and so forth. So with a little bit of Googling, you probably could find those resources as well. When it comes to payment, I'm assuming Doxa has a way of doing things. What's your experience around that? Tactically, let's say you're not using Doxa, how do you get money to someone in the Philippines or to Vietnam or any other country for that matter? What tools are you using to do that effectively?
Well, so from our perspective, because we're an employer, right? So we're structured as a U.S.-based entity that owns a wholly owned sub in the Philippines. So contracts are written in U.S. contract law, and payments are provided there. We send enough over to the entities then to cover operations and a tidy profit, but most of it is done here. So it's a simple transaction, just like any in the U.S. If somebody was to contract somebody directly, though, they could use any of the platforms like PayPal, the Cash App, any of those, Venmo could potentially work as long as they're not as long as they're open in those different countries. And again, each country is going to have certain restrictions, but there's lots of companies out there that will help remit cash from the U.S. To these different organizations. And, the three that I mentioned are just three of many.
I think it's important to note that, and I believe it's PayPal and maybe others as well. When if you only have 1 or 2 employees in the Philippines, paying them through PayPal may not be a big deal because the amount of money you're dealing with isn't large enough to worry about. But at some point, when you've got like 40 or 50 employees in the Philippines, it becomes actually quite significant. The fees that are being charged to the employee in the Philippines, if you go about paying them through PayPal or Cash App or others, are actually quite significant. And so I know that with a little research, you can find ones that have the minimal amount of currency exchange costs that don't charge, your employee or your outsourced agent there. And I know from our perspective, we're paying them on the same pay schedule that we pay our employees. So on the 5th or the 20th of every month, we're sending payments through a tool. We still live here? I went black for a second. You still there, David?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, good. David, how often do you guys charge your clients for resources?
Yeah, once a month. So we bill them once a month for the work that's done, and then and it's generally net 15 terms. So it's pretty flexible. I mean, we try to make it as easy as humanly possible, and we burden the rate. So like we talked about earlier, that 13th month, the payrolls, the benefits, the taxes, all those things are included in that. So it's just one easy payment to a vendor from their perspective, and then we take care of distributing that down to the team in the increments that are needed.
Awesome, great. I don't see any questions coming in from the live crew. This is, of course, going to be broadcast through our YouTube channel to all of our subscribers. So for those of you that have questions, feel free to reach out to David. With that, David, if they want to learn more about Doxa talent, where should they go, and how do they engage?
Yeah, so easy to go to the website, which is just Doxa, DOXA, doxatalent.com. And there's a place where you can fill out a form and request information. You're also happy to email talent.com as well. But I think my perspective, I think it's worth people looking into this opportunity as a way to sort of grow their businesses long term. And I think lots of viable options out there. And I think, there's many people, even myself, who are willing to be a resource to help you sort of think through what that strategy could look like and how it might work for your team.
I never got asked the question, so let's go ahead and end with this. How did you come up with the name Doxa? Where'd that come from?
I'm glad you asked that. So doxa is a Greek term for changing the belief in something. So when I first started looking at the industry, I was a little disappointed by the work conditions, the way they paid their workers, how they thought about talent development, that a significant amount of them were being contracted, so they weren't getting the benefits and taxes that an employee would get. Thus, they didn't have access to social services. And we thought that there was a way that we could provide a security and a better employee experience for people internationally that would also be a great value for people domestically. And we wanted to sort of take that stain off of outsourcing and offshoring and sort of come out as a more, an offering for the conscious capitalist, someone that wants to do good while receiving good.
Conscious capitalist. I think I have 6 things I've written down from our interview today. All are great one-liners to remember and mantras to live by. And I've enjoyed our time together as always, David. Thank you so much for joining us on the Home Service Summit webinar series. And if any of you are listening and want to learn more about outsourcing, David's a wealth of resource here. And so feel free to reach out to him as well. David, do you have maybe is it worth noting your email address just real quick for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can see my name on the screen here. It's just david.nilssen@doxa7.com. That'll be the easiest way to get me.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, David. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.